Alright, let's talk about Sherlock Holmes, a character so iconic that some people literally believed he was a real dude living on Baker Street. Yes, at one point tourists kept knocking on the door of 221B so much that London had to put up an actual plaque. That's how deep the obsession goes, but today, we're not talking about the Benedict Cumberbatch version, or Robert Downey Jr. doing parkour in Victorian London, or the countless anime and cartoon spin-offs. We're rolling back to where it all began, the very first story written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, A Study in Scarlet. And trust me, for a first episode, this one starts wild. So if you enjoy smart mysteries and story breakdowns like this, consider hitting subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Let's start. We open not with Holmes, but with Dr. John Hamish Watson, an army surgeon serving in Afghanistan. And let's just say, things weren't going great for him. He gets shot in the shoulder, nearly dies, then catches enteric fever, a disease that, in the 1800s, might as well have been a boss fight with no healing potions. The British Army looks at this half-dead man and goes, yeah, let's send him home. So Watson returns to London. But surprise, London is expensive. He's broke, alone, and basically one rent payment away from sleeping on a park bench. Then comes Stamford, an old acquaintance who listens to Watson complain about his life and goes, I know a guy who needs a roommate, but fair warning, he's unique, which is the Victorian way of saying, he's weird, bro. Watson, desperate for affordable rent, immediately agrees. So they head to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where Holmes spends his time experimenting with things that look one mistake away from disaster. They step into the lab, glass tubes, strange chemicals, bottles with no labels, and right in the middle, Sherlock Holmes. Suddenly, I found it! He lights up. He's just created a chemical test that can detect even the tiniest trace of blood, a breakthrough that would later define forensic science. Not bad for a guy who doesn't know basic astronomy. Stamford cuts in and introduces Watson. They shake hands. Holmes looks at him for 2 seconds. You've just returned from Afghanistan. Watson freezes. How did you? Holmes smiles. Elementary. He does not explain. And just like that, Watson realizes this is no ordinary man. This is someone who sees what no one else even notices. The next day, Watson officially moves into 281B Baker Street and immediately begins observing Holmes as if he's studying a rare exotic bird in its natural habitat. He notices that Holmes is bursting with energy one day and completely motionless the next. That strange visitors show up at all hours, and that Holmes somehow knows everything about chemistry, but nothing about politics, literature, or, hilariously, the fact that the Earth revolves around the sun. Confused by this selective genius, Watson finally asks how a man can be so brilliant, yet so clueless, and Holmes simply replies, the human brain is like an attic. You only store the things you need. A philosophy every college student wishes they could apply during math exams. Watson is still baffled and has no idea what Holmes actually does for a living, until he stumbles upon a newspaper article about deductive reasoning and casually insults the entire concept right to Holmes's face. Pseudoscience, Watson mutters. Holmes turns to him with the Victorian equivalent of, oh, you sure about that? And in their first tiny roommate argument, he finally reveals, I'm a consulting detective. People bring me problems the police cannot solve. And in that moment, everything clicks for Watson. Every strange visitor, every odd mood swing, every random burst of chemical expertise suddenly makes perfect sense. But Holmes doesn't leave it there. Instead of arguing further, he goes back to that moment. Watson still can't explain, the one from the laboratory. This time, he breaks it down, piece by piece. The posture of a military man, the steady hands of a doctor, the contrast between a sunburned face and pale wrists, a subtle stiffness in movement, like someone recovering from injury. Individually, these details mean nothing, but together, they point to a very specific story. A British Army doctor, recently wounded, sent back from a harsh, unforgiving environment. And in that entire world, there is only one place that fits. Afghanistan. No guesswork, no magic, just observation, connected with precision. And just like that, Watson stops doubting. Because this isn't guesswork, it's a method. Days later, Holmes complains that he hasn't had a challenging case in ages. And then, as if the universe heard him whining, a letter arrives from Scotland Yard. Signed by Inspectors Gregson and Lestrade, the two best detectives in London who absolutely despise each other, yet somehow both admire Holmes. They're requesting his assistance on a strange and serious murder case. Holmes immediately lights up like a kid on Christmas morning, grabs his coat and tells Watson, "Come on, you're joining this field trip." They arrive at an abandoned house on Brixton Road. Inside, a dead man on the floor. No wound, no blood. A bitter smell lingering around his mouth. And on the wall, the word Raish scrawled in red. Gregson and Lestrade proudly present this as their smoking gun. Holmes takes one glance and goes, "That's German for revenge." Cute, someone's trying way too hard. He then tunes everyone out, whips out a tape measure, and drops to the ground like a forensic ninja doing side quests. Footprints, wheel ruts, cigar ash, the full detective starter kit. Watson watches in awe as if Holmes just evolved into his final form. Once finished, Holmes refuses to explain a single thing. "If I tell them now, they'll steal the credit." And honestly, knowing Gregson and Lestrade, he's probably right. Before leaving, Holmes gives Watson the tiniest breadcrumb. Tall man, strong build, drives a cab, and he was bleeding. Then he puts on his hat and heads home, as if solving murders is just his version of self-care. But the scene isn't done giving up its secrets just yet. A little later, when the police circle back, Lestrade finds something new. A ring. A woman's wedding band. Suddenly, that becomes his big breakthrough. Gregson, not to be outdone, digs into the victim's belongings and turns up more connections. Names, letters, traces of a second man. One name stands out. Joseph Stangerson. And just like that, the case stretches far beyond this quiet house. All the way to America. Before long, the police reports, the ring, the names, the new leads, make their way to Holmes. Back at Baker Street, Holmes starts scheming. He explains that the killer must have returned to the house later that night. Something only one eyewitness, Constable John Rance, noticed, but didn't realize was important. Which tells Holmes exactly what happened. The murderer came back for something he dropped. And that something is the wedding ring Gregson pocketed earlier. Holmes immediately sets a trap, using the Victorian equivalent of clickbait. A newspaper ad reading, found, gold wedding ring. Inquire at 221B Baker Street. Ask for Dr. Watson. Watson did not sign up for this. Holmes simply volunteered him anyway. Hours later, there's a knock at the door. A frail old woman claims the ring belongs to her daughter. Holmes listens politely and quickly realizes she's lying with the confidence of someone who rehearsed the story on the way over. He hands her a fake ring and follows her to see where she leads him. But the moment she climbs into a cab, she loudly announces her destination. And then both she and the cab disappear into the night. It's the detective equivalent of clicking a sketchy link and watching your computer immediately regret it. Holmes returns home annoyed, but intrigued. This wasn't a one-man operation. The next morning, Watson walks into the living room and freezes. Half a dozen scruffy kids are just standing there, as if Holmes accidentally unlocked a hidden side quest. These are the Baker Street Irregulars, Holmes's personal network of street scouts who know every alley, rumor, and shady shortcut in London. Basically, Victorian Google Maps, paid in coins and compliments. Their leader, Wiggins, delivers an update. The mysterious cab driver still hasn't been found. Holmes pays them anyway and sends them back out with the most oddly specific homework assignment imaginable. Find a cab pulled by a horse with a freshly replaced shoe. Good luck, tiny detectives. Not long after the irregulars are sent back out, Inspector Gregson storms into Baker Street like he's announcing the final round of a game show. He proudly declares the case solved. And to be fair, he actually brought receipts. Gregson lays out his masterful police work. He found an Underwood hat next to the body. He tracked it to a shop, found out it belonged to Enoch Drebber, and got the address to a boarding house run by a Mrs. Charpentier. After some aggressive questioning, the landlady finally spilled the tea. Turns out, Drebber was an absolute nightmare of a guest. He constantly harassed her daughter, Alice. One night, a heavily drunk Drebber grabbed Alice and tried to drag her away. Enter Arthur, Alice's brother, a naval lieutenant who was absolutely furious. Arthur fought Drebber off. When Drebber ran away, Arthur grabbed a walking stick and chased him into the night, coming back very late. The very next day, Drebber is found dead. Even Arthur's own mother thought he did it. Gregson did the math. Angry brother plus heavy stick plus dead creep equals case closed. He arrested Arthur and is now taking his victory lap right in front of Holmes and Watson. Holmes listens politely, nodding the way a teacher nods while letting a student finish the wrong answer in peace. Then, right in the middle of Gregson's gloating, Inspector Lestrade bursts in with news dramatic enough to deserve its own theme music. The second American, Lestrade announces, Joseph Stangerson, found dead in his hotel room, stabbed right through the heart. Same red Rache written on the wall. The room goes completely quiet. Gregson's solid theory collapses instantly. Arthur Charpentier, innocent. Gregson, humiliated. Holmes, doing a heroic amount of emotional restraint. Lestrade then produces one more item recovered from Stangerson's room. A small pillbox. 2 pills. Identical. 1 harmless. 1 lethal. Holmes's eyes sharpen. This changes everything. The killer didn't just poison his victims, he forced them to choose. A perfect, cruel game of chance. 50-50. But how do you prove that? As fate would have it, their landlady had recently asked Holmes to put her old, dying dog out of its misery. Convenient timing. Holmes dissolves the first pill into water. The dog laps it up. Nothing. He dissolves the second pill. The dog takes 1 step and collapses instantly. Let's just say Victorian medical ethics were flexible. Gregson and Lestrade immediately begin firing off theories, motives, wild guesses. None of them land. Holmes silences the room with a look. I know who did it. And now the final pieces slide into place. The poison, the ring, the letters from America, and the footprints. Holmes had been staring at them since the beginning. Those uneven hoof marks outside the crime scene. 1 shoe freshly replaced, the pattern unmistakable. Now the question wasn't what happened. It was who could stand outside a murder scene for hours without drawing suspicion. A cab driver. Specifically a cab driver with 1 newly shod horse. Right on cue, Wiggins burst through the door. Sir, the cab you asked us to find, it's here. The room goes still. Holmes rises calmly. He turns to Lestrade. Would you be so kind as to test those handcuffs? Make sure they still function. Moments later, Holmes invites the cab driver upstairs under the pretense of helping move a heavy trunk. The man steps inside. He bends down to lift it. Click! The handcuffs snap shut. Holmes turns to the stunned room. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Jefferson Hope. The murderer? Gregson freezes. Lestrade freezes. Watson freezes. The twist lands clean. The killer was never hiding in the shadows. He was driving through London every single day, in plain sight. Holmes folds his arms, satisfied. I did say I'd catch him. But this wasn't random murder. This was vengeance years in the making. To understand why Jefferson Hope hunted these men across continents, we have to rewind. We're leaving foggy London behind and heading straight to the scorching deserts of Utah, America.